The crystal champagne flutes of the exclusive Aria restaurant reflected a lie. For 10 years, Andrea had believed in the fairy tale, the whirlwind romance, the lavish wedding, the doting millionaire husband Jack. Tonight on their anniversary, surrounded by panoramic city views and the scent of $1,000 roses, that fairy tale was set to implode. He didn't just ask for a divorce. He had it served to her cold and final right between the appetizer and the main course. But the real gut punch wasn't the end of her marriage. It was the reason that showed up on her doorstep the very next morning in the arms of his sister. The air in their penthouse apartment, a sprawling expanse of glass and minimalist art overlooking Central Park, was always still. It was a manufactured tranquility curated by silent, efficient staff and the sheer sound-dampening quality of wealth. Andrea had once found it peaceful. Now it felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a life that was technically hers, but felt increasingly alien. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window was that of a woman sculpted by privilege. Her dress, a sliver of silk from a designer whose name was a whisper among the elite, clung to a figure honed by personal trainers and a diet of organic, joyless greens. Her blonde hair, styled into effortless waves by a man who flew in from Paris twice a month, cascaded over one shoulder. She looked perfect. She felt hollow. Jack, her husband, was the architect of this gilded cage. Jack Westbrook, a name that echoed with the clatter of stock tickers and the hushed reverence of boardrooms. He hadn't just inherited wealth. He had multiplied it with a ferocity that bordered on demonic. He was a titan of industry, a man whose ambition was a roaring furnace that consumed everything in its path. Including Andrea was beginning to realize their marriage. Their love story had been the stuff of tabloids. The brilliant, ruthless billionaire and the quiet art history graduate who worked at a small gallery. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that had left her breathless. He'd filled her life with a dizzying array of luxuries, private jets to whisk them away to St. Bart's for a weekend front-row seats at every fashion week, and a black Amex card with a limit that was purely theoretical. He had built her a life most women only dreamed of, and for a long time she had loved him for it. She had mistaken his possessiveness for passion, his control for care. But 10 years was a long time. The grand gestures had slowly been replaced by a quiet, insidious control. Her friends, the ones from her pre-Jack life, had drifted away, intimidated by the sheer scale of her new world. Her career had been gently but firmly discouraged. "Why would you want to work, darling?" he'd murmured, "when you can have anything you desire." And so she had become another one of his beautiful acquisitions, a flawless object to adorn his perfect life. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion in the cavernous rooms of their home. Jack was always working. Even when he was physically present, his mind was elsewhere, lost in the complex calculus of mergers and acquisitions. Their conversations had become a series of perfunctory exchanges, a checklist of social obligations and household management. The passion that had once defined them had dwindled to a flicker, then to an ember, and now she feared to cold dead ash. Tonight was their 10th anniversary. A decade. It felt like a lifetime. Jack had, in his typical fashion, arranged everything. A reservation at Aria, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a public phone number. A new diamond necklace nestled in a velvet box on her vanity. Its brilliance a cold comfort. He was a master of the grand, empty gesture. As she fastened the clasp of the necklace, her fingers trembled slightly. She had tried in the beginning to bridge the growing chasm between them. She had planned romantic getaways only to have him cancel at the last minute for an urgent meeting. She had tried to talk to him to voice the gnawing emptiness in her heart, but her words seemed to bounce off the impenetrable wall of his indifference. He would listen with a placid smile, pat her hand, and tell her she was being overly emotional. Tonight, she had promised herself, would be different. Tonight, she would demand to be heard. She would tell him that she couldn't live like this anymore, a beautiful ghost in her own life. She wanted more than just his wealth. She wanted him. She wanted the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world. She found him in his study, a room paneled in dark, imposing mahogany. A cigar in one hand, a glass of whiskey in the other. He was on the phone, his voice a low, commanding rumble. He didn't look up as she entered, just gestured for her to wait. The smoke from his cigar curled in the air, a pungent, acrid scent that seemed to suffocate her. When he finally ended the call, he turned to her, his eyes the color of a stormy sea sweeping over her in a quick, appraising glance. "You look stunning, Andrea." It was a statement of fact, not a compliment. "Happy anniversary, Jack," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He walked over to her and kissed her on the cheek, his lips cool and dry. "Happy anniversary, my love." The endearment was a reflex devoid of any real warmth. He picked up a sleek leather-bound portfolio from his desk. "Shall we go? I have a surprise for you at the restaurant." The drive to Aria was silent, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows of the Maybach. Andrea's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. She rehearsed the words she would say, the areas of her discontent she would finally perform. The restaurant was everything she had expected, opulent, hushed, and filled with the kind of people whose faces graced the pages of Forbes. They were led to a secluded table with a breathtaking view of the glittering skyline. The sommelier, a man with a ridiculously French name she couldn't pronounce, presented them with a bottle of champagne that cost more than her first car. Jack was in his element, charming and urbane, discussing wine vintages with the sommelier and nodding graciously to the other power players in the room. He was performing the role of the devoted husband, and he was doing it flawlessly. The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of seafood and foam that looked more like a work of art than food. Andrea pushed it around her plate, her appetite gone. "Is something wrong, darling?" Jack asked. His brow furrowed in a convincing display of concern. "You're not eating." This was it. Her opening. "Jack, we need to talk." He sighed, a long theatrical exhalation of breath. "Andrea, not tonight. It's our anniversary." "That's why we need to talk," she insisted, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I can't do this anymore." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Do what exactly?" "This," she said, gesturing around them at the opulent surroundings. "This life. It's not real. We're not real." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "I provide you with a life most people would kill for. You have everything you could ever want. I don't have you." The words burst out of her raw and wounded. "I'm so lonely, Jack. I feel like I'm drowning." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something that chilled her to the bone. He smiled. It was a cold, cruel smile devoid of any humor. "You're right," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "This isn't working anymore." He reached for the leather portfolio he had brought with him and slid it across the table. "Happy anniversary, Andrea." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of crisp white paper, were divorce papers. Her name was printed in stark black ink, a final brutal testament to the end of their marriage. The room spun, the glittering city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of pain. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. He was still smiling, that same chilling smile. "I've been planning this for months," he said, his voice a low, triumphant purr. "I just wanted to wait for the perfect occasion." The world tilted on its axis. The hushed whispers of the other diners faded into a dull roar in her ears. She felt a scream building in her throat, a primal sound of anguish and betrayal, but it was choked off by a wave of nausea. "Why?" She managed to whisper the word, a ragged, broken thing. "Because I'm bored, Andrea," he said, taking a sip of his champagne. "And because I found someone else. Someone who is more suitable." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just ended their marriage. He had savaged it, leaving her emotionally eviscerated in the middle of a crowded restaurant. She felt the eyes of the other diners on her, their curious glances like tiny, sharp knives. She stood up, her legs unsteady. I'm leaving." "Of course," he said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "The driver is waiting outside. All of your things have been packed and sent to a storage facility. The penthouse is no longer your home. My lawyers will be in touch with yours." He had thought of everything. He had orchestrated her demise with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his business dealings. She was just another asset to be liquidated. She walked out of the restaurant, her head held high, a queen abdicating her throne. She didn't look back. The tears came then, hot and furious, blurring the city lights into a watery abstraction. The doorman, a man who had greeted her with a deferential smile for years, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The driver, a man who had driven her to countless shopping sprees and charity luncheons, opened the door for her in silence. The Maybach, once a symbol of her gilded cage, was now her getaway car. As the car pulled away from the curb, she finally allowed herself to break. The sobs racked her body, a violent, guttural outpouring of a decade of repressed emotions. She had been a fool. A naive, trusting fool. She had believed in a fairy tale, and he had turned it into a horror story. The car sped through the deserted streets of the city, carrying her away from the life she had known. A life that had been a beautiful, elaborate lie. She had no idea where she was going, what she would do. She had nothing. He had taken everything from her. Or so she thought. The true depth of his betrayal, the final devastating twist of the knife, was yet to come. It was waiting for her in the cold, sterile light of the morning. Part 2. The Unraveling of a Perfect Life. The key to the hotel suite felt foreign in her hand, a cold, impersonal piece of plastic. The hotel, a chic boutique establishment her friend Clara had booked for her in a frantic late-night phone call, was a world away from the opulent grandeur of the penthouse. The suite was stylish and modern, but it lacked the soulless perfection of Jack's world. Here there were signs of life of other people. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. Andrea had spent the night in a daze, replaying the scene at the restaurant over and over in her mind. Jack's cold, triumphant smile was seared into her memory, a brand of his cruelty. The words he had spoken, each one a carefully chosen weapon, echoed in the silence of the hotel room. "I'm bored, Andrea. I found someone else. More suitable." Who was she? This more suitable woman. Was she younger, more beautiful, more ambitious? The question swirled in her mind, a venomous cocktail of jealousy and self-doubt. She had given him 10 years of her life, had molded herself into the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect accessory to his perfect life. And for what? To be discarded like a piece of last season's couture. Sleep had been a fleeting, tormenting thing, filled with nightmares of falling from great heights, of being trapped in a house of mirrors, her own reflection mocking her with Jack's cruel smile. She had woken up to the gray, unforgiving light of dawn, her body aching, her eyes swollen and raw from crying. She had called Clara, her one remaining friend from her pre-Jack life, a sharp, witty lawyer who had always been suspicious of Jack's manufactured charm. Clara had been a whirlwind of practical advice and fierce, unwavering support. "We'll fight him, Andrea," she had said, her voice a comforting balm on Andrea's raw nerves. "We'll take him for everything he's worth." But it wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the betrayal, the sheer calculated cruelty of it all. He had not just left her. He had tried to annihilate her. A knock on the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Clara was at her office, already mobilizing her legal team. She peered through the peephole and her blood ran cold. It was Josie, Jack's sister. Josie Westbrook was a woman who moved through the world with the same ruthless ambition as her brother. She was a venture capitalist. Her mind a steel trap, her heart. Andrea had always suspected, made of the same cold, hard material. She and Andrea had never been close. Josie had always looked at her with a thinly veiled condescension, as if she were a frivolous, decorative object that her brother had inexplicably acquired. What was she doing here? Had Jack sent her to deliver another blow, another calculated cruelty? Andrea's hand trembled as she unlocked the door. Josie stood in the hallway, a stark, imposing figure in a tailored pantsuit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, her face a mask of cool composure. But there was something different about her today. A flicker of something that looked like uncertainty in her usually unflappable demeanor. And in her arms, bundled in a soft cashmere blanket, was a baby. Andrea stared at the baby, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The baby was tiny, its face a perfect miniature version of... She couldn't quite place it. But there was a familiarity there, a ghost of a resemblance that sent a shiver down her spine. "Josie, what is this?" Andrea's voice was a hoarse whisper. Josie's composure seemed to crack then. Her carefully constructed mask of indifference crumbled, revealing a woman who looked lost and overwhelmed. "Andrea, I didn't know where else to go." She pushed past Andrea into the room, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She sank onto the sofa, the baby still cradled in her arms. The baby began to fuss, a small mewling sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous silence of the room. "Whose baby is this?" Andrea asked, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A terrible, preposterous thought began to form in her mind, a thought so monstrous she couldn't even give it voice. Josie looked up at her, her eyes so like her brother's, filled with a mixture of pity and something else, something that looked like guilt. It's Jack's," she said, her voice barely audible. The world seemed to stop spinning. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, pressing down on Andrea with an unbearable weight. Jack's baby. The words reverberated in her mind, a discordant, shattering symphony. "But how?" Andrea stammered, her mind reeling. We couldn't have children." It had been the one unspoken sorrow in their otherwise perfect life. They had tried for years a grueling, emotionally draining journey of fertility treatments and dashed hopes. The doctors had never been able to find a specific reason, a cruel, unexplained infertility that had cast a long, dark shadow over their marriage. Jack had been surprisingly stoic about it, almost indifferent. "It doesn't matter, Andrea," he had said. "I have you. That's all I need." Another lie. Another one of his beautiful, hollow lies. "It's not your baby, Andrea," Josie said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It's his. And hers." "Hers?" The word was a choked, strangled sound, the more suitable woman. "Her name is Olivia," Josie said, her gaze fixed on the baby in her arms. "She's a surrogate. Jack hired her a year ago." A year ago. The timeline was a brutal, unforgiving thing. A year ago they had still been married, still sharing a bed, still going through the motions of a life together. While she had been grieving their childless state, he had been creating a new life with another woman. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The room felt like it was closing in on her, the walls pressing in on her, suffocating her. "Why are you here, Josie?" Andrea asked, her voice a hollow echo of her former self. "Why are you telling me this?" Josie finally met her gaze, and for the first time Andrea saw a flicker of something that looked like genuine remorse in her eyes. "Because he's gone, Andrea. He's left the country. He's on a plane to Dubai with her. Olivia." "He left? With the surrogate?" The words were absurd, a line from a bad soap opera. "Yes," Josie said, her voice trembling slightly. "He left me a note. He said he was starting a new life. He said the baby was my problem now." The sheer, unadulterated selfishness of it was breathtaking. He had not only betrayed his wife, but he had also abandoned his own child, leaving her in the care of his sister, a woman who looked as comfortable holding a baby as she would holding a ticking bomb. "He just left her?" Andrea asked, her voice laced with a horrified disbelief. "He said he had a new life to build, and a baby didn't fit into his plans." Josie said, her voice thick with a bitterness that surprised Andrea. He said he had provided for her financially, and that was enough. The baby started to cry, then a full-throated, desperate wail. Josie looked down at her, her expression a mixture of panic and helplessness. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't know how to take care of a baby." And in that moment something shifted in Andrea. The grief, the anger, the betrayal. It was all still there, a raging inferno in her chest. But something else was there too. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A sense of purpose. She looked at the crying baby. A tiny innocent life caught in the crossfire of her father's monstrous ego. This baby was a product of Jack's betrayal, a living, breathing symbol of his cruelty. But she was also an innocent, a victim in all of this. Andrea stood up and walked over to the sofa. She looked at Josie, a woman she had never liked, a woman who was a part of the family that had so callously discarded her. But in that moment she didn't see an enemy. She saw another woman, another victim of Jack's destructive ambition. "Give her to me," Andrea said, her voice surprisingly steady. Josie looked up at her, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and relief. She hesitated for a moment, then carefully, awkwardly handed the baby to Andrea. Andrea took the baby in her arms. She was so small, so fragile. Her tiny fists were balled up, her face red and scrunched up in a mask of distress. As Andrea held her, something miraculous happened. The baby stopped crying. She opened her eyes, and for the first time Andrea saw them clearly. They were the color of a stormy sea. Jack's eyes. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees, washed over her. It was a strange, confusing cocktail of love, hate, and a fierce, primal protectiveness. This baby was a part of him, a part of the man who had shattered her life. But she was also her own person, a tiny, innocent soul who deserved to be loved and cared for. And in that moment, looking down at the baby in her arms, Andrea knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to crumble. She wasn't going to let him win. She was going to fight. For herself, for her future, and for this tiny, innocent baby who had been so cruelly abandoned. The war had just begun. And she, Andrea Westbrook, was no longer a victim. She was a warrior. The first 72 hours with the baby were a descent into a chaotic, sleep-deprived hell. The chic hotel suite, once a sterile sanctuary, rapidly devolved into a command center for a tiny, tyrannical ruler named Lily. The air grew thick with the scents of baby powder and sour milk, the sleek glass tables cluttered with bottles, sterilizing equipment, and piles of muslin cloths. Silence became a forgotten luxury, replaced by a relentless cycle of wails, gurgles, and the frantic rustle of diaper changes. Andrea, still reeling from the psychological demolition of her marriage, found herself thrown into the trenches of newborn care with no training and no map. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Lily's needs were too immediate, too absolute. Each cry was a siren that jolted her from her stupor, forcing her into action. She moved like an automaton, her body aching with a fatigue so profound it felt like a physical illness. In the dead of night, while rocking a screaming Lily, the sheer impossibility of it all would wash over her. She was a ghost of a wife, a stranger in a hotel, and now the sole guardian of a child born from her husband's ultimate betrayal. It was a reality so absurd, so cruel, that sometimes all she could do was hold Lily and weep silently along with her. And through it all Josie stayed. She was a strange, spectral presence in their chaotic bubble. She would leave before dawn in her severe dark suits, a warrior heading to her own corporate battlefields, and return late in the evening to the domestic wreckage. Initially, she was paralyzed by the scene, hovering awkwardly by the door, as if unsure of her right to enter. Her attempts to help were both touching and comical. One evening, she arrived with a shopping bag from a designer children's boutique containing a pair of miniature leather shoes that cost more than Andrea's entire outfit, and a cashmere onesie utterly impractical for a baby. "I thought she might need these," Josie had said, a rare hint of uncertainty in her voice. Andrea, exhausted and covered in spit-up, had managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Josie. They're beautiful." The turning point came late one night. Andrea had finally managed to get Lily to sleep, collapsing onto the sofa, feeling the full weight of her despair pressed down on her. "I never understood it," Josie said quietly from an armchair across the room, making Andrea jump. "The desire for children. It always seemed like a liability, a distraction from what's important." "And what's important, Josie?" Andrea asked, her voice flat. "Power money. The Westbrook Empire." Josie flinched, but she didn't deny it. "That's what we were taught. Legacy. Assets." Jack didn't see a daughter. He saw an heir. He commissioned her like he would a new skyscraper. And when the project became inconvenient, he simply abandoned it and moved on to the next venture. She looked at Andrea, her composure finally cracking. "He's a monster, Andrea. He's my brother and I love him, but he's a monster. I'm so sorry it took me this long to truly see it." The raw confession hung in the air, a fragile offering. For the first time, Andrea saw past the corporate raider to the woman beneath, another victim of Jack's corrosive ambition. "I see it now, too," Andrea whispered. "I was just too blinded by the fairy tale to notice the rot underneath." In the daylight hours, Clara was their general, marshalling her forces with a terrifying fury. "We're not just defending, we're documenting," she declared, her voice crisp over the phone. "Every move they make, every threat, every lie. We build our case brick by brick." The first direct assault from Jack's camp arrived not as a phone call, but as a sleek black courier envelope delivered by a stone-faced messenger. It felt cold to the touch. Inside, on heavy cream-colored stationery, was a letter from Jack's legal team. Andrea read it, her blood turning to ice. The language was sterile, devoid of any humanity. It outlined the proposed settlement, a one-time payment that, while substantial to an ordinary person, was an insulting pittance from a man of Jack's staggering wealth. It was the financial equivalent of tossing a few coins to a beggar. But it was the paragraphs that followed that truly chilled her. The letter explicitly stated that Mr. Westbrook disavowed any and all paternal connection and responsibility for the child, referring to Lily only as the product of the surrogacy agreement. His generous one-time contribution to a trust fund was framed as a final act of charity, severing all ties. The final sentences were a masterclass in veiled intimidation, warning that if Andrea were to contest the more than reasonable offer or speak publicly about the private details of their separation, Jack would pursue all available legal avenues to protect his privacy and reputation. "He's trying to buy her, then bury her," Andrea said, the paper trembling in her hand. "He's trying to erase us." Clara's voice was grim. "It's a declaration of war, Andrea, and he's just fired the first shot." The next salvo was even more vicious. Jack's lawyers filed a motion for an emergency custody hearing. Their claim was as outrageous as it was cruel. They argued that since Andrea had no biological relationship to Lily and was in a state of severe emotional distress, she was an unfit guardian. They petitioned the court to have Lily removed from her care and placed into the foster system pending a more stable, permanent solution. The cruelty was breathtaking. He would rather see his own daughter become a ward of the state than allow her to be raised by the woman he had spent a decade calling his wife. The courtroom was a sterile, wood-paneled arena where Jack's lawyers, a team of impeccably dressed sharks, began their systematic attempt to dismantle Andrea's character. They twisted her grief into hysteria, her love for Lily into a manipulative ploy for money. They questioned her stability, her motives, her sanity. Andrea sat beside Clara, her hands clenched in her lap, forcing herself to remain composed as they painted a grotesque caricature of her. But they had not counted on Josie. When she took the stand, a palpable hush fell over the courtroom. In her crisp suit, she was the very image of a Westbrook, powerful, articulate, and unflappable. But the words she spoke were a stunning betrayal of her own tribe. She calmly and methodically detailed her brother's plan, his cold-blooded hiring of the surrogate, and his final chilling act of abandonment. "My brother Jack Westbrook Josie stated, her voice clear and unwavering as she looked towards the judge. "Views this child not as a daughter but as a failed acquisition. He tasked me with her disposal. His exact words were, 'She's your problem now.'" Josie's testimony was a powerful counterpunch, but the turning point came from a source none of them expected. A frantic, tearful voicemail was left on Clara's office line. It was Olivia, the surrogate. They arranged to meet in a quiet, anonymous cafe far from the media circus. Olivia was younger than Andrea had imagined, her eyes wide and haunted with a guilt that seemed too heavy for her slender frame. She hunched over her cup of tea, her story tumbling out in a torrent of shame and regret. "He was so charming at first," she sobbed, twisting a napkin in her hands. "Mr. Westbrook, Jack. He told me I was helping create a family. He said he and his wife had tried for years and this was their last hope. I thought I was doing a noble thing." She recounted how as the pregnancy progressed, Jack's charm had evaporated, replaced by an iron-fisted control. He had isolated her, monitored her diet, and treated her less like a person and more like a vessel he had leased. The luxury apartment he provided felt like a gilded cage. "The day she was born, he was so cold," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He held her for maybe a minute. There was no joy, no love. He just looked at her, at Lily, like she was a product he was inspecting for flaws. Then he handed her back to me and said, 'My work here is done.' The next day he was gone. The money was in my account, and he was just gone." Olivia had been terrified and alone. When she saw the news reports of the custody battle of Jack's lawyers trying to paint Andrea as an unstable gold digger and have Lily taken into care, she knew she couldn't stay silent. "He's a liar," Olivia said, her voice shaking with a newfound anger. "He's trying to hurt you, and he's using her to do it. His own baby." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "He said he wanted updates. I recorded some of our calls. I don't know if this will help, but—" Clara took the phone. They listened, huddled together in the booth, as Jack's voice filled the small space, cold, detached, and utterly damning. In one recording made just weeks before Lily was born, Olivia asked him if he was excited to finally be a father. "Excitement is an inefficient emotion, Olivia," Jack's recorded voice replied coolly. "This is a transaction. You are fulfilling your side of the contract, and I am fulfilling mine. Once the asset is delivered, our business is concluded." The asset is delivered. It was the smoking gun. Back in court, Olivia's testimony was a bombshell. She was visibly terrified on the stand, but as she recounted her story, her voice grew stronger. When Clara played the recording for the court, a gasp rippled through the gallery. Jack's lawyers objected furiously, but the judge overruled them, her face a thunderous mask of contempt. The tide had not just turned, it had become a tidal wave. The judge, a formidable woman named Judge Carroll, delivered her ruling with a sharp, unequivocal fury. She looked directly at Jack's lead counsel. "In my 15 years on the bench, I have seen a great deal of callousness, but Mr. Westbrook's behavior represents a new and despicable low." She then turned her gaze to Andrea, and for the first time her expression softened with something that looked like empathy. "This court's primary concern is, and always will be, the well-being of the child. It is abundantly clear that this child, against all odds, has found a loving and stable home with Ms. Westbrook." She awarded temporary sole custody to Andrea, her gavel striking the wood with a crack of finality. It was a stunning victory. As the courtroom emptied, Andrea finally let go, sobbing into Clara's shoulder. Not tears of sadness, but of profound, bone-deep relief. That night, back in the quiet of the hotel suite, she held a sleeping Lily in her arms, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She had won. She had protected this child. But as she looked out at the glittering, indifferent city, she knew this was not the end. She had publicly humiliated a man like Jack Westbrook. She had exposed him, wounded him. and a wounded predator she knew was the most dangerous animal of all. The storm had passed for now, but the war had just begun. The judge's words awarding her temporary custody echoed in the silent hotel suite long after Andrea had returned from court. It was a victory, a significant one, but it didn't feel triumphant. It felt like a brief, desperate gasp of air before being plunged back under the waves. The war was far from over. This was just one battle won. The media frenzy, which had briefly shifted in her favor, was a fickle beast, its cameras and microphones a constant looming presence outside her temporary home. They were vultures circling, waiting for the next dramatic turn, the next scrap of her life to devour. The financial strain was a constant gnawing anxiety. Clara's legal team was a fortress, but fortresses were expensive to maintain. Jack's lawyers, operating with a seemingly bottomless war chest, were masters of attrition. They buried them in motions, appeals, and procedural delays, each one costing time and money Andrea simply didn't have. She began the painful process of liquidating her old life piece by piece. The first to go was a Cartier watch, a third anniversary gift. Then a string of pearls from a trip to Japan. Each sale felt like severing a jeweled chain that had bound her to Jack. It was a bitter yet deeply liberating exorcism. She was trading the gilded remnants of her past for a chance at a future. In the midst of this turmoil, a strange, fragile domesticity began to bloom within the walls of the suite. Lily was the sun around which their new misshapen planet revolved. Her gurgles and coos were the soundtrack to their days, her sleepy sighs, the benediction of their nights. She was a constant, demanding, beautiful reality that grounded Andrea, pulling her back from the edge of despair whenever the legal battle threatened to consume her. Josie remarkably remained. She had shed her severe pantsuits for softer knits, her hair often escaping its tight chignon. She was still hopelessly awkward around Lily, holding her as if she were a delicate, ticking explosive. But she was present. She would return from her own punishing days at the office and sit quietly on the sofa, watching Andrea feed or bathe the baby, a complex, unreadable emotion in her stormy Westbrook eyes. It wasn't just guilt or pity. It was a kind of wistful curiosity, as if she were observing a life she never knew could exist. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of depositions where Jack's lawyers had tried to paint her as mentally unstable, Andrea was at her breaking point. Lily was wailing inconsolable with colic, and Andrea's own tears began to fall, silent drops of exhaustion and frustration. Josie, who had been hovering uselessly in the doorway, stepped forward. "Give her to me," she said, her voice softer than Andrea had ever heard it. Hesitantly, Andrea passed the screaming infant into her sister-in-law's arms. Josie surprisingly didn't flinch. She began to pace the room, humming a low, tuneless melody, something from a forgotten childhood. And miraculously, Lily's cries began to subside, her tiny, racked body relaxing against the unfamiliar shoulder. Andrea watched, stunned, as Josie soothed the child to sleep. In that quiet moment, a silent, unspoken bridge was built between the two women, an alliance solidified not in a boardroom, but in a nursery. The calm was shattered a few nights later. The phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. A cold dread snaked up Andrea's spine. She answered, her hand trembling. "Andrea!" The voice was a distorted electronic rasp, but it was unmistakably him. "Jack." The air left her lungs. "What do you want, Jack?" Her voice was a fragile whisper. "I want you to stop." He hissed, the sound venomous even through the speaker. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're ruining me, my business, my reputation. You're destroying everything I've worked for." The sheer audacity of his victimhood was staggering. "You did that to yourself, Jack," she said, a flicker of her old fire returning. "You did this when you lied, when you cheated, when you abandoned your own child." A low, menacing laugh echoed down the line. "My child. That thing that was a means to an end, Andrea. An heir. A detail. And you were supposed to be a detail too. A beautiful, quiet one. You were never supposed to fight back." The cruelty of his words stole her breath, but she refused to let him hear her falter. "Well, I am fighting back." "You think you've won, don't you?" He sneered, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You think you can take what's mine and build a new life on the rubble of the one I gave you? You're a fool, Andrea. You have no idea who you're dealing with. This isn't over." "Is that a threat, Jack?" "It's a promise." He said the words dripping with malice. "I'm going to take everything from you. I'm going to make you wish you had never ever met me." The line went dead, leaving only a dial tone that buzzed with menace. Andrea sank into a chair, her body shaking uncontrollably. The fear was real, a primal terror that Jack, with his infinite resources and non-existent conscience, could make good on his promise. But beneath the fear, something else was crystallizing. A cold, hard anger. He hadn't just threatened her. He had threatened Lily. He had called his own daughter a thing. The last vestige of the woman who had loved Jack Westbrook died in that moment, replaced by a warrior. The next morning she met with Clara and Josie. Her eyes were hard, her voice steady. "He called me," she said, relaying the conversation word for word. "He's not going to stop. We can't keep fighting a defensive war. It's time to attack." Clara leaned forward, her expression grim. "Andrea, that's a dangerous path. If we go public with what we have on his business dealings, we unleash a whirlwind. There's no coming back from that." "He's left us no choice," Josie interjected, her voice sharp with a businesswoman's pragmatism. "My brother only understands one thing: overwhelming force. He sees this as a hostile takeover of his life. We need to initiate a leveraged buyout of our own." She had a file in her hands, a thick manila folder she placed on the table. "I have contacts. People Jack has burned over the years. Disgruntled board members, cheated partners. They've been waiting for a moment of weakness. This is it." Andrea looked at the file, then at the two women beside her. This was her decision. She thought of Lily asleep in the next room, so innocent and unaware. She thought of Jack's voice calling his own daughter a thing. "Do it," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "Burn it all to the ground." What followed was a masterfully executed corporate assassination. Clara and Josie orchestrated the release of information with surgical precision. They didn't just leak documents, they crafted a narrative. The story wasn't just about a messy divorce. It was a saga of corporate malfeasance, insider trading, and ruthless intimidation, with Jack Westbrook as the villain at its center. They fed the story to a respected investigative journalist, ensuring it had credibility. The explosion was nuclear. Headlines screamed from every newsstand. Financial news networks ran round-the-clock coverage of the implosion of Westbrook Enterprises. The stock didn't just plummet. It ceased to exist. The board of directors, in a desperate act of self-preservation, ousted him. Federal investigators, armed with the information Andrea and Josie had provided, descended on his offices. His empire, the monument to his ego he had built over a lifetime, crumbled to dust in a matter of days. In the midst of this public immolation, another unexpected visitor appeared at their door. It was Olivia. She looked different from the frightened young woman in the coffee shop. There was a new strength in her eyes, a quiet determination. "I saw the news," she said, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I've been doing a lot of thinking." She looked at Andrea, her gaze direct and full of a raw, painful honesty. "When I gave birth to Lily, I thought my job was done. I took the money because I was desperate, and I told myself it was for the best. But I was wrong. I see how you are with her. I see the pictures of you, and you're her mother." Tears welled in Andrea's eyes. "Olivia, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Olivia insisted, her voice gaining strength. "He paid me to have a baby, but he can't buy my silence, and he can't buy my rights. And he can't take away the fact that I am her mother, too." She took a deep breath. "I'm filing for parental rights, not to take her from you, to share her with you. I want us to be her mothers, together." The proposal was breathtaking in its audacity and its grace. A family formed not by convention, but by the shared love for a child abandoned by her father. Their final day in court felt different. It was no longer an adversarial battleground. It was the formal recognition of a truth that had already been established. Andrea and Olivia stood side by side, a united front. The judge, the same stern woman from before, looked down at them, her expression softening. She read the documents from Olivia's lawyer, her eyes scanning the unprecedented request for joint legal custody. "In all my years on the bench," the judge said, her voice resonating with a quiet awe, "I have never seen a situation quite like this. A child brought into the world under a contract, abandoned by her father, and then embraced by two women who have every reason to be enemies." She looked directly at Andrea, then at Olivia. "What you have done is create a family where there was none. You have chosen love over bitterness and cooperation over conflict. This court is not only pleased, but honored to grant this request." As for Jack, he vanished. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Rumors occasionally surfaced of him being spotted in countries with no extradition treaties, a fallen king living in self-imposed exile. He had tried to destroy Andrea, but like a phoenix, she had risen from the ashes of the life he had burned down, stronger and more radiant than before. Months later, on a bright sunny afternoon, Andrea sat on a blanket in Central Park. The city skyline, once a symbol of her gilded cage, now felt like a backdrop to her freedom. Beside her, Olivia was showing Lily how to make a flower chain. A short distance away, Josie, looking surprisingly at ease in jeans and a sweater, was engaged in a serious phone call, but she kept glancing over, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. Lily, taking a wobbly, triumphant step, tumbled into Andrea's arms, giggling. Andrea held her close, burying her face in her daughter's soft curls, breathing in the scent of sunshine and innocence. This life was chaotic, unconventional, and utterly unpredictable. It wasn't the fairy tale she had once been sold. It was something far more real and infinitely more precious. It was a story of survival and sisterhood, a life she hadn't chosen, but one she had built. And for the first time in a very long time, Andrea felt completely, profoundly at peace. The story of Andrea and Jack is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most picture-perfect lives hide the darkest secrets. What would you do if you had it all? The perfect marriage, a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a baby on the way. Now, what would you do if you discovered in a single heart-shattering moment that it was all built on a foundation of lies? For Isabella Rossi, the answer wasn't to scream or cry or even to leave. Her response was something far more terrifying. She found the woman sleeping with her husband, and she gave her a job. This isn't a story about forgiveness. It's a story about control, about a woman pushed to the edge who decided to rewrite her own tragedy, one calculated, devastating move at a time. The life Isabella Rossi had meticulously built was a masterpiece of modern success. At 34, she was the founder and CEO of Aura, a boutique marketing agency in the heart of the city that had become the go-to for luxury brands seeking an edge. Her office, a symphony of glass, chrome, and soft gray furnishings, overlooked the sprawling metropolis, a daily reminder of the heights she had climbed. Her apartment, a spacious loft in a converted warehouse district, was her sanctuary. It smelled of Jo Malone candles, freshly brewed espresso, and the faint sweet scent of the expensive prenatal lotions she now massaged into her burgeoning 7-month baby bump. Her husband, Ethan Hayes, was the final perfect brushstroke in this portrait of domestic bliss. Handsome, with a disarming smile and the easy confidence of a man who worked in high finance, he was her rock. They had met in college, a whirlwind romance that had settled into a deep, comfortable love. He was the calm to her storm, the steady hand on her back at industry events, the man who would listen for hours as she mapped out campaign strategies on their living room floor. He was, she believed, her soulmate, the father of her unborn child. The first crack in this porcelain existence appeared on a Tuesday. It was late, well past midnight. Isabella had been jolted awake by the baby kicking a now familiar and welcome intrusion. She smiled, rubbing her belly, and glanced over at Ethan. He was sound asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His phone, which was usually on his nightstand, was on the floor, having slipped from his hand. As she reached down to retrieve it, the screen lit up. A notification from an app she didn't recognize, a stylized flame icon. The message preview was short, but it was enough to stop the air in her lungs. Chloe, still awake. Can't stop thinking about last night. Your skin against mine. Isabella's blood ran cold. It was a physical sensation, a painful iciness that started in her chest and spread to her fingertips. She stared at the screen, her mind refusing to process the words. Chloe. The name was a foreign object, a piece of shrapnel embedded in the soft tissue of her life. Last night Ethan had been late. A last-minute client dinner, he'd said. He had come home smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint floral perfume that wasn't hers. At the time, she hadn't thought twice. She trusted him. Her first instinct was a tidal wave of raw primal rage. She wanted to shake him awake, to shove the phone in his face and watch his perfect features crumble into a mask of guilt. She wanted to scream, to shatter the quiet peace of their home, to let out the animalistic cry that was clawing at her throat. But then a different instinct took over. It was the CEO in her, the strategist who never made a move without first understanding the entire board. Screaming would give him the advantage. He would deny, deflect, gaslight. He would call her hormonal, accuse her of being paranoid because of the pregnancy. He would seize control of the narrative. No, she would not give him that. With hands that trembled almost uncontrollably, she picked up the phone. His thumb, limp, and sleep was all she needed. She pressed it against the home button. The phone unlocked. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, panicked bird. The app was a dating app, one known for discreet encounters. Their message history was a novel of betrayal. Weeks of it. Months. I've never felt like this with anyone, Ethan had written. When are you going to tell her? Chloe had asked just 3 days ago. Soon, baby. I promise. It has to be delicate. She's pregnant. The word delicate was a particular cruelty. He was handling the destruction of their marriage with the same detached care he would afford a sensitive stock portfolio, and the use of her pregnancy, their child, as a shield, as an excuse for his cowardice, that was the deepest cut of all. Isabella didn't sleep. She sat in the dark living room, the city lights a blur through her unshed tears. The rage was still there, a simmering cauldron in her gut, but now it was accompanied by a chilling, crystalline clarity. Divorce was inevitable. Her life as she knew it was over. But it would not end like this. She would not be the weeping, broken victim in this drama. She was Isabella Rossi. She built brands from nothing. She could surely orchestrate a demolition. She needed to know her enemy. The next morning she operated on pure adrenaline. She feigned a headache, letting Ethan fuss over her before he left for work, his kiss on her forehead feeling like the brand of a liar. The moment the door closed behind him, she was at her laptop. Chloe. The dating app profile was sparse, but it had a last name, Bennett. A quick search on social media brought her to an Instagram profile. Chloe Bennett. 26, pretty in a fresh-faced girl next door way, with a feed full of artistic photos of brunch cityscapes and selfies that radiated a hungry ambition. Her bio read graphic designer, dreamer, making things beautiful. Isabella felt a fresh wave of nausea. Making things beautiful. She was trying to make something beautiful on the wreckage of Isabella's life. With a few more clicks, Isabella found her professional portfolio online and then her LinkedIn profile. Chloe Bennett was a freelance graphic designer, talented even. Her aesthetic was clean, modern, and aligned perfectly with the kind of clients Aura represented. And that's when the idea began to form. It was a monstrous, terrifying, and utterly brilliant thought. It started as a whisper in the back of her mind, a flicker of vengeance so audacious it almost made her laugh. What if she didn't just watch Chloe from a distance? What if she brought her closer? What if she made this woman who was secretly trying to dismantle her life directly dependent on her for a paycheck? The plan was insane. Her best friend Amelia would have her committed, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt right. It was a move no one would ever see coming. It was a way to reclaim her power, not by ending the game, but by changing the rules so completely that she was the only one who knew how to play. She would learn every one of Chloe's weaknesses, her fears, her ambitions. She would see with her own eyes what Ethan saw in her, and she would do it all from the ultimate position of power as her boss. Her agency, Aura, just happened to have a job opening for a mid-level graphic designer. The listing had gone up last week. Isabella's fingers flew across the keyboard. She opened her work email, her expression hardening into a mask of pure, steely resolve. She found the generic HR email address listed on Chloe Bennett's professional website. Subject: Graphic Design Opportunity at Aura. Dear Ms. Bennett, my name is Isabella Rossi, CEO of Aura Marketing. I came across your portfolio online and was exceptionally impressed with the quality and creativity of your work. Your aesthetic aligns perfectly with the direction we are taking with several of our key luxury accounts. We currently have an opening for a senior graphic designer, a position that I believe would be an excellent fit for your talents. If you are interested in exploring this opportunity, I would like to invite you to our offices for an interview at your earliest convenience. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, Isabella Rossi. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The email shot into the digital void, a declaration of war disguised as a job offer. She leaned back in her chair, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. The baby kicked again, a small internal flutter. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered to the empty room. "Mommy's got this." The war had begun, and Isabella Rossi was about to bring her enemy right through the front gates. 2 days later, Chloe Bennett walked into the polished, intimidatingly serene reception area of Aura Marketing. She clutched a leather portfolio to her chest, her chosen outfit a chic but professional black jumpsuit radiating a carefully constructed confidence. She was nervous, but it was the excited nervousness of a young professional on the cusp of a major career breakthrough. Aura was the big leagues. A job here working directly under the legendary Isabella Rossi was the kind of thing you dreamed about. She had been ecstatic when she received the email. Isabella Rossi herself had reached out. Chloe had bragged about it to Ethan over a clandestine lunch, her voice buzzing with excitement. "She said she was exceptionally impressed with my work. Can you believe it?" she'd gushed. Ethan had frozen for a second, a forkful of pasta halfway to his mouth. Isabella Rossi at Aura. "Yes, isn't it amazing?" "It's a small world," he'd said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He felt a prickle of unease, a strange convergence of his two separate lives that felt dangerous. But he'd quickly dismissed it. It was a coincidence. A bizarre, unnerving coincidence, but nothing more. He couldn't possibly tell Chloe that his wife was the CEO who wanted to hire her. The lie was too deep, the deception too entangled. So he simply said, "Wow, Chloe, that's incredible. You deserve it." Now standing in the heart of Isabella's empire, Chloe had no idea she was a pawn in a game she didn't even know was being played. The receptionist led her down a long hallway to a corner office with a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. And there she was, Isabella Rossi. She was even more formidable in person. Even heavily pregnant, she commanded the space. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored cream-colored maternity dress that looked like it cost more than Chloe's rent. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant bun, and her expression was one of cool, unreadable authority. She didn't rise. She simply gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Ms. Bennett, thank you for coming in. I'm Isabella Rossi." "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Rossi," Chloe said, her voice a little breathier than she would have liked. She noticed the wedding ring, a formidable diamond that seemed to catch and refract the light with an accusatory gleam. "Please have a seat," Isabella said, her voice smooth as silk yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. She didn't smile. The interview began with standard questions. Isabella asked about Chloe's design philosophy, her experience with specific software, and her previous freelance projects. Chloe, growing in confidence, answered fluently, opening her portfolio to showcase her best work. She was good. Isabella had to give her that. It made it all the more infuriating. Then Isabella's questions began to shift. The change was subtle, a scalpel slipping between the ribs. "Tell me about your long-term goals, Chloe. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Isabella asked, leaning forward slightly, her hands clasped over her baby bump. The subtext screamed in her own mind. "Do you see yourself in my house raising my child?" "I want to be a creative director," Chloe answered earnestly. "I want to be leading a team, shaping a brand's entire identity. I'm very ambitious." "Ambition is good," Isabella said, her gaze unwavering. "But it can make people reckless. How do you handle high-pressure situations? Say when you're dealing with a difficult client or when personal and professional lines get blurred." Chloe felt a flicker of unease at the phrasing. "I believe in maintaining professionalism at all times," she said carefully. "Clear communication and managing expectations are key. You have to keep things separate." "Oh, do you now?" Isabella thought, a bitter, silent laugh echoing in her head. "Like keeping your affair with a married man separate from his pregnant wife." "An excellent answer," Isabella said aloud, her face a perfect mask of corporate approval. She flipped a page in Chloe's resume, though she wasn't reading it. She had already memorized every word. "It says here you value dedication and building lasting relationships. How do you define loyalty in a professional context, Chloe?" The question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Chloe shifted in her seat. "Loyalty is about commitment. It's about seeing a project through, about being trustworthy and having the company's best interests at heart. It's about honoring the faith that someone puts in you." Each word was a fresh stab in Isabella's heart. This woman could sit here in her office and speak of loyalty while actively trying to steal her husband. The audacity was breathtaking. Isabella felt the rage churning, but she channeled it into an icy calm. This was not about losing control. This was about taking it. "I see," Isabella said slowly, her eyes boring into Chloe's. "And what about when a situation becomes untenable? When you find yourself in a position that is ethically compromised? Do you walk away, or do you see it through, hoping for a different outcome?" Chloe's professional smile faltered. The questions were becoming strangely personal, intensely philosophical for a design job interview. She thought of Ethan, of the promises he'd made, of the stolen nights, and the guilt that sometimes gnawed at her. I believe in fighting for what you want," Chloe said, her voice hardening slightly, a flash of the defiance Isabella had seen in her Instagram bio. "If you believe something is worth it, you don't just give up." It was the confirmation Isabella needed. Chloe wasn't some naive girl swept up in a fantasy. She was a fighter. She had a goal, Ethan, and she was not going to back down. Isabella stood up, a clear signal that the interview was over. Chloe scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. Had she blown it? Had she said something wrong? Isabella walked around the desk, her presence filling the room. She stopped directly in front of Chloe, close enough that Chloe could smell the expensive, subtle scent of her perfume. It smelled like power. "You're very impressive, Chloe," Isabella said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "You're hungry, you're talented, and you're not afraid to fight for what you want. I like that." She extended a hand. "The job is yours. We can offer you a salary 60% higher than your current freelance rate, full benefits, and a significant signing bonus. We would need you to start Monday." Chloe was stunned into silence. She hadn't even discussed salary yet. It was an offer beyond her wildest dreams. The money, the prestige, the job itself, it was everything she had been working for. All her doubts vanished, replaced by a wave of triumphant elation. "Yes," she stammered, shaking Isabella's hand. Isabella's grip was firm, cool, and lingered a moment too long. "Absolutely yes. Thank you, Mrs. Rossi. Thank you so much. You won't regret this. Isabella finally allowed herself a small, tight smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and held a glint of something terrifying. "Oh, I know I won't," she said softly. As Chloe practically floated out of the office, dizzy with success, Isabella remained standing by the glass wall. She watched the younger woman's retreating back until she disappeared down the hall. She had done it. The fox was now in the hen house. But the farmer was waiting, holding the keys to the cage. The first part of her plan was complete. Now the real torture could begin. She placed a hand on her belly, a silent promise to her child. The game was afoot, and she was about to find out just how loyal and dedicated Chloe Bennett truly was, not just to her new job, but to her husband. Chloe's first week at Aura was a dizzying blur of new systems, new colleagues, and the intoxicating thrill of legitimacy. The office was even more impressive from the inside. She had her own spacious cubicle with a brand new top-of-the-line computer. Her colleagues were sharp, stylish, and welcoming. And the salary, her first paycheck, hit her account that Friday, a figure so substantial it made her feel giddy. This was it. This was the life she was meant to live. Her boss, Isabella Rossi, was an enigma. She was brilliant, demanding, and possessed an almost supernatural attention to detail. In meetings, she could dissect a campaign concept with surgical precision, her insights leaving everyone in the room scrambling to take notes. Chloe was in awe of her. She was also terrified of her. Isabella's management style was a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as corporate rigor. On Chloe's first day, Isabella assigned her to a major new client, a high-end Swiss watchmaker. It was a huge vote of confidence, and Chloe was determined to prove herself. She poured her heart and soul into the initial branding concepts, working late into the night, fueled by ambition and takeout coffee. She presented her work to Isabella on Wednesday afternoon, her hands trembling slightly as she walked her new boss through the sleek, sophisticated designs. Isabella listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When Chloe finished, she stared at the presentation on the screen for a long, agonizing minute. "It's competent," Isabella said, finally, the word landing like a slap. "But it has no soul, Chloe. It feels generic. It's what anyone would do. I hired you because I thought you were exceptional, not competent." She pointed to a specific font Chloe had chosen. "This font, it's too soft. It suggests a lack of conviction. Start over. I want to see something with more strength by Friday morning." Chloe was crushed. She had thought the designs were her best work, but she nodded meekly, gathered her things, and returned to her desk, her face burning with humiliation. She spent the next 36 hours in a frantic caffeine-fueled haze, redesigning the entire campaign from scratch. Meanwhile, Isabella watched. From her glass-walled office, she had a clear view of the entire floor. She saw Chloe's shoulders slump in defeat. She saw her rubbing her tired eyes, and she felt a grim, satisfying twist in her gut. This was just the beginning. The torment was in the details. Isabella would casually walk past Chloe's desk while Chloe was on a furtive, whispered phone call, presumably with Ethan. Isabella wouldn't break her stride, but her presence was enough to make Chloe stammer and quickly hang up. One afternoon, Isabella called Chloe into her office. "I have a personal favor to ask," she said, her tone making it clear it was not a request. "My husband's company is hosting a charity gala next month. We handle the marketing pro bono. I need a stunning invitation designed, something classic, elegant." Chloe's blood ran cold. My husband. She had to design an invitation for an event hosted by her lover's company for her lover's wife. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. "Of course, Mrs. Rossi," she managed to say. "His name is Ethan Hayes." Isabella continued watching Chloe's face for the slightest flicker of recognition. "He's a senior VP at Sterling Cross Capital. Perhaps you've heard of him." Chloe's heart hammered in her chest. She forced a neutral expression, a skill she was rapidly learning was essential for survival at Aura. "I don't believe so, but I'll get right on it." "Good," Isabella said, turning back to her computer. He's very particular. He'll want to see the proofs himself. The lie was seamless. Ethan had never seen a proof in his life, but it was the perfect excuse to create a pressure cooker. Life for Ethan was becoming increasingly confusing. The affair, which had once been a thrilling escape, was now a source of stress. Chloe was no longer the carefree, adventurous woman he had been drawn to. She was constantly exhausted and on edge. "My boss is a nightmare," she complained during a hurried secret dinner. "She's a slave driver, a perfectionist. She had me redo an entire campaign because she didn't like the conviction of the font." "Then quit," Ethan said, exasperated. "You don't need this job, Chloe." "Quit, Ethan, are you crazy? This is Aura. The money is incredible and the name on my resume is priceless. I just have to stick it out. It's just, her husband is a client and I have to design this whole gala invitation for them. It's so awkward." Ethan almost choked on his wine. Her husband. She's married. Of course she's married. She's massively pregnant, for God's sake. I think she's due in a couple of months. I feel so bad for the guy, honestly. She must be impossible to live with. A cold dread washed over Ethan. A pregnant CEO named Isabella. A husband whose company was a client. It couldn't be. The odds were astronomical. He felt a desperate need to know his lover's boss's last name. "What's her name?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Isabella. I don't know her last name. Everyone just calls her Isabella or Mrs. R," Chloe replied, oblivious. "Anyway, I have to run. I have to pull an all-nighter to get this gala design perfect for Ethan Hayes." The name hit him like a physical blow. Ethan Hayes. She had said his name. He stared at her, his mind racing, connecting the dots with sickening speed. Isabella Rossi. Aura. Pregnant. His company. His name. It wasn't a coincidence. His wife had hired his mistress. The realization didn't come with a bang, but with a horrifying, silent implosion. He felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't bad luck. This was a plan. A deliberate, calculated, psychopathic plan. His brilliant, strategic wife, the woman he had underestimated, was playing a game so complex he couldn't even see the board. He looked across the table at Chloe, who was reapplying her lipstick, complaining about kerning and paper stock. She had no idea. She was a lamb being led to a slaughter she couldn't even conceive of. And he was trapped. What could he do if he told Chloe she would confront Isabella and the explosion would be catastrophic? If he confronted Isabella, she held all the cards. She could ruin him not just personally but professionally. His wife wasn't just angry. She was dismantling his life piece by piece from the inside out, and she was using his own mistress as the tool. The next few weeks were a living hell for both Chloe and Ethan. Isabella's cruelty became more refined. She would schedule last-minute emergency meetings on Friday evenings, forcing Chloe to cancel her plans with Ethan. She would praise Chloe's work in front of the entire team, only to rip it apart in private moments later. The ultimate twist of the knife came one Tuesday afternoon. Isabella buzzed Chloe on the intercom. "Chloe, could you come in here for a moment?" When Chloe entered the office, Isabella was on her speakerphone. "So I'll just meet you there around 7:30, honey," Isabella was saying. "Love you." "Love you too, Izzy," Ethan's voice replied from the speaker, a voice Chloe knew intimately. Chloe froze, her blood turning to ice water. That voice. It was Ethan's. There was no mistaking it. Izzy. That was his pet name for his wife. Isabella hung up the phone and looked up at Chloe, a picture of innocence. "Sorry about that. My husband," she said with a warm, wifely smile. "He can be a little needy. Now about the banner ads for the Sterling Cross Gala." Chloe stood rooted to the spot, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and horror. Ethan's wife was named Isabella, Izzy, and she was the CEO of Aura, the pregnant, terrifying, brilliant CEO who was making her life a living hell. It all crashed down on her at once. The coincidence. The strangely personal questions in the interview. The constant pressure. The impossible demands. The overheard phone call. This wasn't a job. It was a prison. A gilded cage she had gleefully walked into. She looked at Isabella, truly looked at her for the first time. The cool, appraising gaze, the faint knowing curl of her lip, the hand resting possessively on her pregnant belly. This wasn't a boss. This was a woman who knew everything. And in that moment, Chloe Bennet understood that she was not a participant in an affair. She was a character in a revenge plot. And the protagonist, the writer, and the director was the formidable, terrifying woman sitting right in front of her. The fear she felt was profound, a primal terror that went far beyond losing a job. She had vastly, catastrophically underestimated her enemy. The revelation shattered Chloe's world. The office, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a panopticon, a prison where the warden watched her every move with knowing, vengeful eyes. Every task, every email, every casual comment from Isabella was now laden with terrifying subtext. A request to pick up coffee was a test of her servitude. Praise for her work was a cruel joke. Criticism was a direct personal attack. Chloe began to unravel, her sleek ambition frayed into raw paranoia. She saw conspiracies everywhere. When a file on her computer was accidentally deleted by an IT glitch, she was convinced Isabella was behind it. When she was assigned the tedious task of archiving thousands of old image files, she saw it as punishment. She started making mistakes, typos, and important copy deadlines missed by a few hours. Her work, once her pride, began to suffer under the weight of her psychological torment. Her clandestine meetings with Ethan became fraught with a new kind of desperation. She knows Ethan. She knows everything. Chloe hissed, huddled together in a noisy, anonymous bar far from either of their usual neighborhoods. She called you on speakerphone right in front of me. She called you honey, and you called her Izzy. Ethan, who had been living with this dreadful knowledge for weeks, feigned shock. What? No. You must have misheard. There are lots of guys named Ethan. It was a weak, pathetic defense, and he knew it. But admitting he already knew would expose his cowardice, his complicity in her suffering. Don't lie to me. Chloe's voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. Her name is Isabella Rossi. Your wife's name is Isabella. She's the CEO of Aura. It's all been a game. She's been torturing me, and you just let it happen. I didn't know, I swear. He lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Chloe, you have to quit. Now. Just walk away from it. And go where? She shot back, her fear turning to anger. She'll ruin me, Ethan. She's connected to everyone in this city. If I just walk out, she could blacklist me. I'll never work in this town again. You have to do something. You have to confront her. Fix this. Fix this. Ethan felt a surge of panicked fury. You're the one who started seeing a married man. I'm the one whose wife is orchestrating some kind of Machiavellian revenge plot. We are so far past fixing this. The argument spiraled, their hushed, angry whispers lost in the din of the bar. Their affair, once a secret, passionate escape, had become a toxic, claustrophobic trap, and Isabella was the one holding the key. Meanwhile, Isabella had an observer of her own. Her best friend Amelia, a sharp-witted corporate lawyer, had watched Isabella's transformation with growing alarm. She sat in Isabella's living room surrounded by baby shower gifts, her expression one of deep concern. Izzy, this has gone on long enough, Amelia said, her voice gentle but firm. I get it. He betrayed you. You wanted revenge. You hired the mistress. It's the plot of a crazy movie. But you're 8 months pregnant. You're toying with this girl, you're driving yourself mad with stress, and for what? To prove a point you've already won. You have all the evidence you need to divorce him and take him for everything he's worth. Isabella calmly folded a tiny onesie, her movements deliberate. It's not about the money, Mia. And it's not about proving a point. It's about control. He took the control away from me. He made me a victim. I am taking it back. I need to see this through to the end. And what is the end? Amelia pressed. What's your endgame here? You humiliate them both, and then what? You're still having a baby with this man. This level of vengeance. It leaves scars on everyone, including you. I'm not the one who will be scarred. Isabella said, her voice dropping to an unnerving calm. "I'm the one holding the scalpel." But even Isabella was beginning to feel the strain. The constant performance was exhausting. The rage, which had once been a hot, motivating fire, had cooled into a heavy, cold stone in her chest. She wanted it to be over. But she couldn't just fire Chloe and divorce Ethan. It felt too simple, too anticlimactic. She needed a finale. She needed a checkmate. And then a new twist emerged, one that not even Isabella in her meticulous planning could have anticipated. It was a discovery that would change the entire nature of the game. Isabella had asked Chloe to consolidate all the files for the Swiss watch account onto a single external hard drive for a client review. It was another make-work task designed to keep Chloe busy and stressed. That evening, after Chloe had left, her face pale and drawn, Isabella took the hard drive into her office. She wasn't checking Chloe's work. She was looking for something else. A part of her, the strategist, wanted to know if Chloe had been careless, if she'd left any personal files on the drive. She plugged it into her computer. Nestled deep within a folder of stock images mislabeled as textures was a hidden folder. Its name was E.H. Financials. Isabella's breath caught. E.H. Ethan Hayes. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. It wasn't just a few files. It was a treasure trove of corporate espionage. There were screenshots of Ethan's private work emails, scans of documents from his desk at Sterling Cross Capital, detailed spreadsheets analyzing his stock portfolio, his bonuses, even the projected value of his inheritance from his parents. But it was the last subfolder that made Isabella's blood run cold. It was labeled Divorce Scenarios. Inside was a series of documents that modeled out potential divorce settlements. There were calculations based on infidelity clauses, asset division in their state, and even speculative assessments of how much Isabella's company, Aura, was worth. Chloe hadn't just been sleeping with her husband. She had been systematically investigating his wealth planning for the eventual breakup and her subsequent payday. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a meticulously planned heist. The realization hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. She had seen Chloe as a rival for her husband's affection, a homewrecker. But she was wrong. Chloe Bennett wasn't just a mistress. She was a predator. A grifter who had targeted Ethan, likely seeing him as an easy mark. The affair wasn't the goal. It was the leverage. Suddenly, the entire narrative shifted. This was no longer just about a husband's betrayal. It was about an attack on her family, her finances, her legacy, and the future security of her unborn child. Chloe wasn't some lovesick girl who deserved pity or even a simple, straightforward revenge. She was a calculating adversary who needed to be neutralized. A new ferocious energy surged through Isabella. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury. Her plan had been about emotional revenge, about reclaiming her power. Now it was about something far more primal: protection. She looked at the evidence on the screen. Chloe had been using Aura's resources, its computers, its servers, to conduct this corporate espionage. She had been building a case against Ethan while on Isabella's payroll. This wasn't just infidelity, it was grounds for a lawsuit. It was a weapon. Amelia's words echoed in her head. "What's your endgame here?" Now, Isabella knew. The endgame wasn't just going to be a confrontation. It was going to be an annihilation. She had the means to destroy not just her husband's affair, but the mistress herself, professionally and legally. She carefully copied the entire E.H. Financials folder onto her own secure server, a digital smoking gun. Then she wiped the original from the hard drive, leaving no trace of her discovery. She leaned back in her chair, a chillingly serene smile gracing her lips for the first time in months. The game had changed. The stakes were higher, and her path forward was brutally clear. The launch party for the Swiss watch client was in 2 weeks. It was being held at a chic downtown art gallery. It was the perfect stage. Everyone would be there: her team, her clients, the city's media, and of course her supportive husband Ethan would be by her side. And the project's lead designer, Chloe Bennett, would be running the presentation. It was time to plan the grand finale. The night of the Chronolux launch party was electric. The art gallery buzzed with the low hum of influential people, journalists, industry titans, and Aura's most valued clients, all sipping champagne and admiring the sleek watch displays. The event was the culmination of months of work, a testament to Aura's prowess, and a personal triumph for Isabella. She moved through the crowd a radiant, formidable queen in her own court. She was dressed in a custom-made deep emerald gown that draped elegantly over her 8.5-month pregnant form. She didn't look tired or strained. She looked powerful, regal. At her side, playing his part, was Ethan. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, but a keen observer would notice the tension in his jaw, the sweat on his brow. He knew something was coming. The air around his wife was too calm, too charged. It was the unnerving stillness before a lightning strike. Across the room, Chloe Bennett was a nervous wreck. She was dressed in a severe black dress, trying to look professional, but her hands were shaking as she double-checked the presentation on a laptop behind the main stage. This party was supposed to be her crowning achievement the moment her hard work on the Chronolux account paid off. Instead, it felt like her own execution. For weeks she had been trapped, working under the terrifying gaze of the woman she had wronged, forced to interact with her, to take orders, to even design the very invitations for this event that now felt like a stage for her own humiliation. Her plan to secure a comfortable future by leveraging Ethan had backfired spectacularly, landing her in a psychological prison. All she wanted was for this night to be over. Isabella had set the stage with the precision of a master director. She had given Chloe a critical role, not just running the main presentation, but also curating a behind-the-scenes digital display that would loop on screens around the venue. She had also, 2 days prior, orchestrated a piece of masterful disinformation. During a casual conversation with another senior staff member, loud enough for Chloe to overhear, Isabella had mentioned a massive last-minute investment deal Ethan's firm Sterling Cross was making in Chronolux, contingent on the success of the launch. She mentioned a 7-figure success bonus for Ethan personally. It was a complete fabrication, but it was the perfect bait. For a grifter like Chloe, the idea of Ethan receiving a huge, immediate cash windfall would be an irresistible lure, making her feel even more desperate about her precarious position. The main presentation began. The lights dimmed. Chloe, from her station at the back, started the slideshow. Images of stunning watches and evocative lifestyle shots filled the giant screen on stage. The presentation was flawless, a testament to Chloe's talent even under duress. When it concluded, the room erupted in applause. The CEO of Chronolux gave a short, effusive speech praising Aura and their brilliant team. Then he introduced the woman of the hour. And now I'd like to welcome the visionary behind this entire campaign, the CEO of Aura, Isabella Rossi. Isabella walked onto the stage, a picture of grace and power. The applause swelled. Ethan watched from the front row, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. Thank you, everyone. Isabella began, her voice resonating with warmth and authority. Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for your trust in us. At Aura, we believe that a brand isn't just a product, it's a story. It's about heritage, integrity, and most importantly, it's about trust. She paused, letting the word trust hang in the air. She smiled, a dazzling, brilliant smile that didn't reach her cold, focused eyes. Building something of lasting value, she continued, whether it's a brand or a life, requires an unwavering commitment to that trust. But sometimes that trust is broken. Sometimes the story you think you're living is revealed to be a complete fiction. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the standard corporate thank you speech. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He wanted to stand up to run, but he was frozen in his seat. Tonight we've celebrated a story of precision, elegance, and legacy, Isabella said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. But I want to share another story. A more personal one. It's a case study, if you will, in brand demolition. She gestured to the large screen behind her. The Chronolux logo vanished. In its place, an image appeared. It was a screenshot of a text message. Chloe, can't stop thinking about last night. Your skin against mine. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Chloe at the back of the room felt the world tilt on its axis. Her presentation remote clattered from her nerveless fingers. This couldn't be happening. "This is a message sent to my husband, Ethan Hayes," Isabella announced, her voice as clear as a bell, "from one of my employees." Another image flashed on the screen. It was Chloe's smiling, ambitious face from her LinkedIn profile. The audience turned as one searching for her. Chloe shrank back into the shadows, her face a mask of pure horror. "My husband," Isabella said, turning her gaze slowly to lock onto Ethan's. "The man standing by my side, building a life with me, waiting for the birth of our first child." Ethan looked up at her, his expression one of utter ruin. He was exposed, flayed open in front of his colleagues, his clients, the world. "But this story has another twist," Isabella continued, her voice hardening. "Because I learned that this wasn't just a simple, sordid affair. This was a business transaction." The screen changed again. Now it displayed the files from Chloe's hidden folder. Spreadsheets titled EH Financials. Documents titled Divorce Scenarios. A detailed analysis of Sterling Cross Capital's bonus structure. "You see," Isabella explained calmly, as if delivering a standard marketing report. "My employee, Ms. Chloe Bennett, wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was using my company's resources to conduct a thorough financial investigation of him. She was planning to leverage her affair into a lucrative divorce settlement. It was a hostile takeover of my life, executed on my time and with my money." The room was utterly silent now, a tomb of shocked faces. All eyes were on Isabella, this heavily pregnant woman standing on a stage, calmly and methodically dismantling two lives with cold, hard evidence on a 20-foot screen. She finally turned her attention to the back of the room, her voice laced with ice. "Chloe, you once told me in your interview that loyalty was about honoring the faith someone puts in you. You told me you fight for what you want. I suppose I should thank you for showing me exactly what you believe is worth fighting for." She looked back at the crowd. "Security," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "Will you please escort Ms. Bennett from the premises? Her employment at Aura is of course terminated. We will be pursuing legal action for corporate espionage and theft of intellectual property." Two burly security guards began to make their way toward the back of the room, where Chloe stood paralyzed and sobbing. Then Isabella's gaze fell upon her husband one last time. The look she gave him was not one of rage, but of cold, dismissive finality. It was the look you would give a stranger a mistake that had been erased. "And as for you, Ethan," she said, her voice dropping yet audible to everyone in the stunned silence, "consider this your notice. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Amelia," she nodded to her friend in the front row, "you know what to do." With that, Isabella Rossi, CEO, wife, and mother-to-be, turned away from the wreckage she had wrought, placed a hand on her belly, and walked off the stage, leaving behind a tableau of ruin and the deafening sound of silence. The grand finale was over. Checkmate. In the aftermath of what the city's gossip columns dubbed the Gala of Annihilation, the lives of Ethan Hayes and Chloe Bennett were irrevocably shattered. Ethan was fired from Sterling Cross within a week, his reputation in the high-stakes world of finance reduced to ashes. The public humiliation was absolute. Chloe Bennett vanished. Faced with a lawsuit from Aura and complete professional ostracization, she disappeared from the city, her name becoming a cautionary tale whispered in marketing agencies and bars. Isabella, however, did not crumble. The divorce was swift and brutal, with the evidence from the gala making any contest by Ethan impossible. She was awarded a settlement that secured her future and her child's future tenfold. 3 weeks after the party, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named her Sophia, meaning wisdom. 6 months later, Isabella stood on the balcony of her loft. The city sprawled before her, no longer just a symbol of her ambition, but a testament to her resilience. In her arms, Sophia gurgled happily, her tiny hand wrapped around Isabella's finger. Aura was more successful than ever, with clients clamoring to be represented by the woman who had demonstrated such breathtaking strategic command. She was a single mother, yes, but she was not broken. She had been betrayed, but she was not a victim. She had taken the shattered pieces of her perfect life and used them to build a new foundation, stronger and more authentic than before. The cold fire of vengeance had been extinguished, replaced by the fierce, warm glow of a mother's love, and the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but had emerged victorious on her own terms. The story wasn't a tragedy of a wife scorned. It was the origin story of a queen who had built her own throne. Isabella's story is a powerful, gut-wrenching reminder that the deepest betrayals can come from the people we trust the most. But it's also a story of incredible strength. She refused to be a victim. She took control of her own narrative and delivered a masterclass in justice. What do you think? Was Isabella a strategic genius who delivered a well-deserved reckoning, or did her quest for revenge go too far? Could you ever do what she did? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The clinking of champagne glasses usually marks a celebration, but at the Sterling family's annual foundation dinner, it became the sound of a life shattering. In front of New York's high society billionaire patriarch, a man who seemingly had it all raised his glass. But the woman he toasted wasn't his wife of 25 years, the mother of his children who had built his empire alongside him. It was a woman half her age, a stranger to them all. What followed was not just a scandal, but a war. A war for a name, a fortune, and a family. And by the next day, the battle lines would be drawn in the most shocking way imaginable. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a symphony of hushed murmurs, and the gentle clinking of silverware against fine china. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small carriage, dripped light onto the assembled guests, a veritable who's who of New York's philanthropic and financial elite. At the center of it all, at the head of the most prominent table, sat the Sterling family. They were the sun around which this glittering solar system of wealth and influence revolved. At the head of the table, radiating an aura of untouchable power, was Richard Sterling. At 55, he was a man carved from granite and ambition, with a mane of silver-streaked dark hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was a self-made titan of industry, a man who had clawed his way from the grimy streets of Hell's Kitchen to the pinnacle of Manhattan's real estate world. His company Sterling Holdings owned a significant portion of the city's skyline, and his name was synonymous with audacious deals and ruthless success. He was a king in his kingdom, and tonight was his coronation. The annual Sterling Foundation Gala was the jewel in his philanthropic crown, a night where he gave back a fraction of his immense fortune with the kind of ostentatious generosity that only the truly wealthy can afford. Beside him, a study in quiet elegance and strained composure, was his wife, Catherine Sterling. At 50, she was still a breathtaking woman with classic patrician features, hair the color of spun gold, and eyes a startling shade of sapphire. She was born into old money, a scion of the prestigious Davenport family, and she had brought to their marriage a pedigree and a social grace that Richard, for all his billions, could never have acquired on his own. She was the perfect corporate wife, the silent partner who had smoothed his rough edges, hosted his endless dinners, and raised their 2 children while he conquered the world. She wore a deep emerald gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, a cascade of diamonds at her throat that had been a 25th anniversary gift from Richard. A gift she was beginning to realize that felt more like a severance package with each passing day. The chasm that had opened between them over the past few years was a silent gaping wound, a truth they both acknowledged but never dared to speak aloud. Across from them sat their children, the products of this gilded cage. 24-year-old Liam was the heir apparent, a younger, softer version of his father. He had Richard's ambition but lacked his killer instinct, a fact that was a constant source of friction between them. Liam, ever the dutiful son, had joined Sterling Holdings after graduating from Wharton, but he felt more like a highly paid subordinate than a future leader. He was handsome, charming, and desperate for his father's approval, a commodity that Richard dispensed with miserly reluctance. Next to Liam was his younger sister, 21-year-old Chloe. She was the family's resident firebrand, a passionate and idealistic art history major at Columbia, who viewed her father's world with a mixture of disdain and reluctant dependence. Chloe had her mother's beauty, but her father's defiant spirit, a combination that made her both captivating and perpetually at odds with her family's expectations. She loved her father, but she loathed what he represented, the cold, calculating world of money and power that she saw as a corrupting force. The dinner had been a carefully orchestrated performance, a series of speeches praising Richard's Midas touch and his supposed magnanimity. Catherine had played her part flawlessly, smiling, nodding, and exuding an air of serene pride as she listened to the endless litany of her husband's accomplishments. But beneath the surface, a cold dread was coiling in her stomach. She had seen the subtle shifts in Richard's behavior over the past year, the late nights he claimed were business meetings, the secretive phone calls he took in his study, the apathetic distance that had replaced the warmth in his eyes. She had suspected, of course. A woman always knows. But she had clung to a desperate hope that she was wrong, that the foundation they had built together was strong enough to withstand the tremors of his midlife crisis. The main course had been cleared, and the waiters were now moving with silent efficiency, refilling champagne glasses for the final toast of the evening. This was Richard's moment, the culmination of the night's adulation. He was expected to deliver a heartfelt speech thanking his supporters, his colleagues, and, of course, his loving family. He was expected to play the part of the benevolent patriarch, the man who had everything and was grateful for it. Richard rose from his chair, a glass of Dom Perignon in his hand. A hush fell over the ballroom as all eyes turned to him. He basked in the attention, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He looked every inch the conquering hero, the master of the universe. He began his speech with the usual platitudes, his voice a deep, confident baritone that resonated with power. He thanked the board of the foundation, the generous donors, the tireless staff. He spoke of his vision for the future, of the legacy he intended to build. Catherine watched him, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She had heard this speech 100 times before in 100 different ballrooms. It was a well-rehearsed script designed to charm and impress. But tonight something was different. There was a reckless, almost cruel glint in his eyes that she had never seen before. A sense of impending doom washed over her, so strong that she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Liam and Chloe were also watching their father, their expressions a mixture of pride and apprehension. They too sensed that something was amiss. The air was thick with unspoken tension. A fragile silence stretched taut over the glittering room. Richard paused, taking a slow sip of his champagne. He let the silence hang in the air for a dramatic beat, his eyes sweeping across the sea of expectant faces. And then he did the unthinkable. His gaze shifted, moving past Catherine, past his children, to a table in the corner of the room. It was a table of lower-level executives from Sterling Holdings, the kind of people who were usually seated in the back, far from the center of power. But tonight one of them was about to be thrust into the spotlight. "But there is one more person I need to thank," Richard said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, almost caressing tone. "A person who has brought a new light into my life, a new passion, a new inspiration." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Catherine's blood ran cold. She followed his gaze, her eyes landing on a young woman seated at the corner table. The woman was beautiful in a way that was both obvious and slightly vulgar. She had long, raven-black hair, a voluptuous figure poured into a tight scarlet dress, and a look of triumphant arrogance on her face. Catherine had never seen her before, but she knew with a certainty that was as sharp and painful as a shard of glass in her heart who this woman was. This was her replacement. "To Ella," Richard declared, raising his glass high, "for showing me what it truly means to be alive." The name hung in the air, a poisoned dart that found its mark in the heart of the Sterling family. Ella. It was a name that would be seared into their memories forever. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with shock, with outrage, with 1,000 unspoken questions. The guests stared mouths agape, their eyes darting from Richard to Catherine to the scarlet woman who was now preening under the spotlight. The carefully constructed facade of the Sterling family had been shattered, and the raw, ugly truth was now laid bare for all to see. For Catherine, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The chandeliers above her blurred into a smear of light. The faces around her became distorted masks of pity and morbid curiosity. The air was thick and heavy, and she felt as if she were drowning. She looked at Richard, at the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, and saw a stranger. His face was flushed with a mixture of arrogance and defiance, his eyes shining with a feverish light. He was not just acknowledging his affair, he was celebrating it, flaunting it in the most public and humiliating way possible. Liam was the first to react. He shot to his feet, his face pale with fury. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He looked from his father to the woman in red, a look of pure loathing on his face. Chloe was frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with horror. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked at her mother, her expression a silent plea for this nightmare to end. But Richard was unfazed. He simply smiled, a cold, dismissive smile that did not reach his eyes. "Sit down, Liam," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't concern me?" Liam's voice rose, attracting the attention of the surrounding tables. "You're humiliating my mother in front of the entire city, and it doesn't concern me." The scarlet woman Ella seemed to revel in the drama. She stood up, a smug smile playing on her lips, and raised her own glass in a mock toast to Catherine. It was a calculated act of cruelty, a declaration of victory. That was the final straw for Catherine. The numbness that had enveloped her began to recede, replaced by a white-hot fury. She rose from her chair with a grace and dignity that belied the turmoil raging within her. She did not look at Richard. She did not look at Ella. She looked at her children, her eyes filled with a strength and resolve that they had never seen before. Without a word, she turned and walked away from the table. She moved with a regal composure, her head held high, her back straight. The emerald gown shimmered around her like a suit of armor. She did not run. She did not cry. She simply walked with a purpose and a finality that was more powerful than any shouted words or shed tears. The entire ballroom watched her go, a silent collective witness to the public execution of a marriage. The murmurs started, then a rising tide of whispers and speculation. The Sterling Foundation Gala would be remembered not for its philanthropy, but for the scandal that had erupted at its heart. As Catherine walked through the grand lobby of the Pierre, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The life she had known for 25 years was over. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by a cruel and reckless stranger. The future she had envisioned was a barren wasteland. She stepped out into the cool night air, the sounds of the city a jarring contrast to the suffocating silence of the ballroom. A lone tear finally escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness, but of rage. Richard had declared war, and Catherine Sterling, the quiet, elegant wife, was about to become a warrior. The battle for the Sterling name, for her children, for her very identity, had just begun. The limousine ride back to the Sterlings' palatial Fifth Avenue penthouse was a study in suffocating silence. The air, usually filled with the comfortable chatter of a family returning from a successful event, was now thick with a toxic mixture of shock, anger, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. Catherine sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the blur of city lights outside the tinted windows. She was a statue carved from ice, her face a mask of impenetrable composure. The single tear she had shed outside the hotel was the only outward sign of the tempest raging within her. Liam sat opposite her, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle throbbed in his cheek. He kept clenching and unclenching his fists, his knuckles white. He was a coiled spring of impotent fury, his eyes darting between his mother's stoic profile and the empty seat beside her, the seat where his father should have been. Richard, in a final act of brazen disrespect, had left the gala with Ella, their laughter echoing in the marble lobby as they disappeared into a waiting sports car, leaving his family to navigate the fallout of his public betrayal. Chloe was curled into the corner of the limousine, her small frame racked with silent sobs. She had her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The sound of her weeping was a heartbreaking counterpoint to the tense silence, a raw, unfiltered expression of the pain they were all feeling. She was the family's emotional barometer, and right now she was indicating a storm of epic proportions. The doorman at their building, a man who had greeted them with a deferential smile for over a decade, averted his eyes as they stepped out of the car. The news, it seemed, had already traveled faster than the speed of light in the hyper-connected world of Manhattan's elite. The scandal was already a raging wildfire, and they were at the epicenter of the inferno. The penthouse, which had always been a symbol of their success and a sanctuary from the outside world, now felt like a gilded cage, its opulent furnishings and priceless art mocking them with their cold, indifferent beauty. The silence that had filled the car followed them into the apartment, amplifying the cavernous space and making it feel even more empty and desolate. Catherine walked directly to the bar, her movements precise and deliberate. She poured herself a generous measure of brandy, her hand steady. She took a long, slow sip, the fiery liquid a welcome burn in her throat. She needed its warmth to combat the icy chill that had settled deep in her bones. Liam finally broke the silence, his voice a raw, ragged whisper. "I can't believe him. I can't believe he would do that. To you. To us." Chloe lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "How could he? Mom! In front of everyone! Who is that woman?" Catherine turned to face her children, her expression softening for the first time that night. She saw their pain, their confusion, their shattered illusions, and a fierce protective love surged through her. They were the only thing that mattered now. "Her name apparently is Ella," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And as for who she is, she's a mistake. A very public, very expensive mistake that your father has just made." She took another sip of her brandy, her mind already working, calculating, planning. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. She had been a CEO's wife for 25 years. She knew how to strategize. She knew how to fight. "What are we going to do?" Liam asked, looking to his mother for guidance, his anger giving way to a sense of helplessness. He was used to his father being in control, making the decisions. Now that foundation had been ripped out from under him. "First," Catherine said, her voice firm, "we are going to stick together. Your father has made his choice. He has chosen to align himself with that woman. He has drawn a line in the sand. Now we must draw our own." She walked over to the large picture window that overlooked Central Park, the city lights a glittering tapestry below. She had stood at this window countless times, looking out at the empire she had helped Richard build. Now she was looking at a battlefield. "He thinks he's won," she said, her voice a low, dangerous murmur. "He thinks he can just discard me, discard us without any consequences. He has underestimated me. He has underestimated his own children." She turned back to them, her sapphire eyes burning with a newfound fire. "This is not just about a marriage anymore. This is about our family. It's about our name. It's about everything we've built. And I will not let him destroy it." The next morning, the city awoke to the Sterling scandal splashed across the front page of every tabloid and news site. "Sterling's Scarlet Night," screamed the headline of the New York Post, accompanied by a grainy photo of Richard and Ella leaving the gala, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. The article was a salacious mix of facts and speculation detailing Richard's public toast, Catherine's dignified exit, and Ella's mysterious identity. She was painted as a young, ambitious marketing executive from Sterling Holdings, a vixen who had sunk her claws into the billionaire tycoon. The phones at the penthouse began to ring incessantly, a cacophony of calls from concerned friends, gossiping acquaintances, and reporters hungry for a quote. Catherine instructed the housekeeper to unplug them. She needed to think, to plan, to prepare for the war that was coming. She called a meeting with her personal lawyer, a shrewd and formidable woman named Jessica Davenport, who also happened to be her cousin. Jessica arrived within the hour, her face a mask of grim determination. She was a bulldog in a Chanel suit, and she was fiercely loyal to Catherine. They sat in the formal living room, the scene of so many happy family gatherings now transformed into a war room. Catherine, with a clarity that surprised even herself, laid out the events of the previous night, her voice calm and measured. She did not cry. She did not rage. She presented the facts with the detached precision of a surgeon. Jessica listened intently, her pen flying across her legal pad. When Catherine had finished, she looked up, her expression a mixture of sympathy and steely resolve. "He's a fool, Catherine. A monumental, arrogant fool, but he's a dangerous fool. We need to move quickly and decisively." "I want a divorce," Catherine said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "But I want more than that. I helped him build that company. My family's money was the seed that started it all. My social connections opened doors for him that would have otherwise been bolted shut. I am not just his wife. I am his partner. And I will not be discarded like a piece of outdated furniture." Jessica nodded, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Under New York law, marital assets are subject to equitable distribution. And we will argue that your contributions to the marriage and to the business were significant. We will go after half of everything, Catherine. The company, the properties, the art collection, everything." "Good," Catherine said. "But there's more. I want to protect the children. Liam's position at the company, Chloe's trust fund. He will try to use them as leverage against me. I know he will. We'll file for an immediate injunction to freeze all marital assets," Jessica said. "That will prevent him from moving money around or making any major financial decisions without court approval. We'll also petition for temporary spousal and child support. We'll hit him hard and fast before he has time to fully comprehend what's happening." While Catherine was plotting her legal strategy, Liam was facing his own battle. He had gone to the office against his mother's advice, determined to confront his father. He found Richard in his corner office, a vast expanse of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the city. He was on the phone, laughing, a sound that made Liam's blood boil. Ella was perched on the edge of his desk, looking as if she owned the place. She was wearing a dress that was even more revealing than the one from the night before, and she was sipping a latte from a Sterling Holdings mug. When Richard saw Liam, his expression hardened. He ended the call and stood up, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for a fight. "What do you want, Liam?" he asked, his voice cold and dismissive. "I want to know what you were thinking," Liam said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I want to know how you could do that to Mom." Richard scoffed, a look of pure arrogance on his face. "Your mother and I have been unhappy for years. It was a charade, a business arrangement. It's time for me to be happy. Ella makes me happy." Ella smiled, a smug, triumphant smile. "Your father is a passionate man, Liam. He needs a woman who can keep up with him." The condescending tone, the casual disrespect, it was too much for Liam to bear. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You've just destroyed this family." "Don't be so dramatic," Richard said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's a divorce. It happens every day. Your mother will be well taken care of. You and Chloe will be fine. Nothing has to change." "Nothing has to change." Liam's voice rose to a shout. "You just publicly humiliated the woman who has stood by you for 25 years, and you think nothing has to change. You've lost your mind." "Watch your tone, Liam," Richard warned, his eyes narrowing. "You're an employee of this company, and I am still your father." "No," Liam said, a sudden chilling clarity descending upon him. "You're not. Not anymore. The man I called my father wouldn't have done this. He wouldn't have been so cruel, so selfish." He took a step back, his decision made in that moment of painful disillusionment. "I quit." He said the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I will not work for you.
I will not be a part of this circus." He turned and walked out of the office, ignoring Richard's bellow of his name. He walked past the curious stares of the other employees, past the whispers and the pitying looks. He walked out of Sterling Holdings, the company he had once believed was his birthright, and he did not look back. Meanwhile, Chloe was waging her own more subtle war. She had spent the morning on the phone, not with friends, but with the trustees of the Davenport Family Foundation, the charitable organization established by her maternal grandparents. She was a junior board member, a position she had always taken seriously. She knew the inner workings of the foundation, and she knew where the pressure points were. She spoke with her great-aunt, the formidable matriarch of the Davenport clan, a woman who had never fully approved of Richard Sterling. Chloe, with a passion and eloquence that belied her years, painted a vivid picture of Richard's public betrayal of his cruelty, of his disrespect for the family name. She spoke not just as a grieving daughter, but as a Davenport defending the honor of their lineage. By the time she hung up the phone, the wheels were in motion. The Davenport family, a powerful and influential force in their own right, was mobilizing. They were cutting ties with Richard, both personal and professional. They were withdrawing their support from his ventures, closing doors that had once been held wide open. They were in their own quiet, devastating way declaring war on Richard Sterling. When Liam arrived back at the penthouse, his face pale but resolute, he found his mother and sister in the living room. He told them what he had done, that he had quit his job, that he had walked away from his father. Catherine looked at him, a fierce pride in her eyes. "You did the right thing, Liam," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You chose your family. You chose your integrity." Chloe then told them about her own conversations, about the Davenport family's response. A small, grim smile touched Catherine's lips. The battle lines were being drawn, and she was not fighting alone. The next day, the family gathered in the living room, a united front against the storm that was about to break. Jessica arrived with a mountain of paperwork, the first salvos in their legal war. The divorce petition, the injunction to freeze assets, the request for spousal support. It was all there ready to be filed. As they were reviewing the documents, the doorman buzzed up. "Mr. Sterling is on his way up," he announced, his voice strained. A cold silence fell over the room. Catherine looked at her children, her expression unreadable. "Let him come," she said, her voice calm. "It's time we had a family meeting." Richard strode into the apartment a few minutes later, his face a thunderous mask of rage. He was not used to being defied. He was not used to his authority being questioned. He was a king who had just discovered that his kingdom was in revolt. He glared at Jessica, at the pile of legal documents on the coffee table. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "It's a divorce petition, Richard," Catherine said, her voice as cold and clear as ice. "And an injunction to freeze all our assets. You will not be spending another dime of our money on that woman." Richard's face contorted with fury. He turned to Liam. "And you pathetic, ungrateful whelp, you walk out on my company, on your future." "I walked out on you," Liam corrected, his voice steady. "I chose my mother. I chose my family." Richard then turned his wrath on Chloe. "And you went crying to your ancient relatives, turning them against me." "I told them the truth," Chloe said, her voice unwavering. "You're the one who brought this on yourself." Richard looked from one defiant face to another, a dawning realization in his eyes. He had expected them to crumble. He had expected them to be weak, to be dependent on him. He had never imagined that they would stand together, that they would fight back. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "You think you can win this? You think you can take me on? I built this empire. I am Richard Sterling." "And I am Catherine Sterling," she said, her voice quiet but filled with an unshakable strength. "And these are our children. You made a choice, Richard. You chose her." She gestured vaguely in the direction of the city, a dismissive wave of her hand. "And now we have made our choice. We choose each other. We choose this family." The battle had been joined. The lines had been drawn. And in the opulent penthouse overlooking Central Park,
The Sterling family minus its patriarch stood united, ready to face the storm. The next day had come, and the family had chosen. They had chosen her. They had chosen Catherine. They had chosen themselves. And Richard Sterling, the king, who had so carelessly discarded his queen, was about to discover that he was no longer ruling a kingdom, but a wasteland of his own making. The war had just begun, and the casualties were yet to be counted. The weeks that followed the fateful dinner were a blur of legal maneuvering, public scrutiny, and a profound seismic shift in the Sterling family's universe. The battle that Richard had so arrogantly ignited was now a full-blown war fought not on a battlefield of mud and steel, but in the sterile conference rooms of law firms, the gossip columns of the city's tabloids, and the hushed, judgmental circles of New York's elite. Richard, accustomed to a world that bent to his will, was stunned by the ferocity and unity of the opposition. He had expected Catherine to be a weeping, broken woman, begging for a reconciliation or a quiet, generous settlement. He had expected his children to be petulant, but ultimately compliant, their dependence on his wealth a leash he could easily tug. He had fundamentally misjudged them, and that miscalculation was proving to be a costly one. The injunction freezing their assets was the first major blow. It was a strategic masterstroke by Jessica Davenport, a legal chokehold that brought Richard's freewheeling financial life to a screeching halt. Suddenly, every major transaction, every transfer of funds required court approval. His plan to set Ella up in a lavish multi-million-dollar condo to shower her with the kind of extravagant gifts that would solidify her position as the new woman in his life was abruptly thwarted. He was a king with a temporarily locked treasury, and the humiliation was exquisite. He retaliated, as was his nature, with brute force. He assembled a legal team of the most ruthless, high-priced sharks in the city, lawyers known for their scorched earth tactics. They filed a counter-petition accusing Catherine of being a gold digger, a woman who had lived a life of luxury on his dime and was now trying to bleed him dry. They painted her as a cold, calculating woman who had been emotionally distant for years, a wife in name only. It was a smear campaign designed to wound and intimidate. But Catherine, buoyed by the unwavering support of her children, and the formidable Jessica, refused to be cowed. She had spent 25 years in Richard's shadow, her own intelligence and strength sublimated to his ego. Now that shadow was gone, and she was stepping into the light, discovering a resilience she never knew she possessed. The public narrative which Richard had assumed he could control was also turning against him. His brazen toast to his mistress had been a public relations disaster, a display of such breathtaking arrogance that it had alienated even his most ardent supporters. The story of Catherine's dignified exit of her children's loyalty had captured the city's imagination. She was cast as the wronged woman, the graceful matriarch defending her family's honor. He was the villain, the callous billionaire who had traded his loyal wife for a younger, flashier model. The other woman, Ella, was also finding that her victory was not as sweet as she had imagined. She had craved the spotlight, the legitimacy that came with being on the arm of a man like Richard Sterling. But the spotlight was now a harsh, unforgiving glare. She was vilified in the press, branded a homewrecker and a social climber. The wives of Richard's friends and business associates, women who had once been her colleagues or superiors, now looked at her with undisguised contempt. She was a pariah, a scarlet woman in a city that prized loyalty and discretion above all else. The war for the Sterling Empire was also being fought on a more personal and perhaps more painful front. Richard, enraged by his children's defiance, began to turn the screws. He cut off their credit cards, a petty act of retaliation that was more symbolic than financially devastating. He sent a curt formal letter to Chloe informing her that he would no longer be contributing to her tuition at Columbia. He tried to bar Liam from the family's country home in the Hamptons, a place filled with a lifetime of memories. But for every move he made, Catherine had a countermove. She used her own personal funds, a substantial inheritance from her parents that Richard had never been able to touch, to cover Chloe's tuition and ensure that her children's lives were not disrupted. She reminded Richard through Jessica that the Hamptons house was a marital asset, and he had no legal right to bar his own son from the property. The children, for their part, were discovering their own strengths in the crucible of this family crisis. Liam, freed from the suffocating pressure of his father's expectations, began to explore his own interests. He had always had a passion for sustainable architecture, an idea that Richard had dismissed as tree-hugging nonsense. Now he started taking online courses, networking with people in the field, and even sketching out plans for his own small, eco-friendly development company. He was finding a purpose that was entirely his own, a sense of self-worth that was not tied to the sterling name or his father's approval. Chloe, always the family's conscience, channeled her anger and hurt into her activism. She became even more involved in her art history studies, focusing on the role of female artists who had been overlooked or marginalized by their male counterparts. She saw a parallel in her mother's story, and it fueled her passion. She organized a student art exhibition on campus, showcasing the work of up-and-coming female artists, and dedicated it to her mother. It was a small act of defiance, but it was a powerful statement of her loyalty and her values. The standoff continued for months, a tense and bitter war of attrition. The legal bills mounted, the emotional toll grew, and the chasm within the family deepened into an unbridgeable canyon. Richard, isolated and increasingly paranoid, became more and more dependent on Ella. But the foundations of their relationship, built on a reckless impulse and a shared desire for a certain kind of lifestyle, were beginning to show cracks. Ella was growing impatient. The life of a pampered billionaire's mistress was not materializing as she had envisioned. The frozen assets meant that the shopping sprees, the lavish trips, the jewelry were all on hold. She was living in a luxury hotel, a gilded cage, but she was not the mistress of a Fifth Avenue penthouse. She was a woman in limbo, and the constant public scrutiny was beginning to wear on her. She had wanted to be a queen, but she was beginning to feel more like a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. The turning point came during a deposition for the divorce case. It was the first time that Catherine and Richard had been in the same room since that fateful night at the penthouse. The air in the conference room was thick with animosity, a palpable living thing. Richard's lawyers, true to their reputation, came out swinging. They questioned Catherine about her spending habits, her social life, her role as a mother. They tried to paint her as a frivolous, detached woman who had contributed nothing to the marriage but her pedigree. Catherine, cool and composed, answered their questions with a quiet dignity that infuriated them. She had her own secret weapon, a collection of meticulously kept diaries that she had maintained for 25 years. They were a detailed record of her life with Richard. A chronicle of the dinner parties she had hosted, the business trips she had organized, the clients she had wooed, the personal sacrifices she had made. When it was Jessica's turn to question Richard, she was relentless. She presented him with evidence of his lavish spending on Ella, of his attempts to hide assets, of his emotional cruelty to his wife and children. Richard, under oath, was forced to admit to his infidelity, to his lies, to his callous disregard for his family. But the most devastating blow came when Jessica began to question him about the early days of his company. She produced financial records, old loan agreements, and personal letters that Catherine had saved. She laid out in painstaking detail how the initial seed money for Sterling Holdings had come not from Richard's own pocket, but from a trust fund established by Catherine's grandfather. She showed how Catherine's family connections had secured him his first major development deal, a deal that had been the launching pad for his entire empire. Richard, for the first time in his life, was speechless. The narrative he had so carefully constructed, the myth of the self-made man, was crumbling around him. He was not just a philanderer, he was a fraud. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of his wife's money and her family's influence. The news of the deposition, of the revelations about the origins of Richard's fortune, sent shockwaves through the business community. His reputation, already tarnished, was now in tatters. His business partners began to distance themselves, his stock price wavered, and the empire he had built with such ruthless determination began to seem vulnerable. For Richard, it was the ultimate humiliation. He had lost his family, his reputation, and now he was in danger of losing his company. He was a king in a kingdom that was rapidly shrinking, his power and influence draining away like sand through his fingers. Ella, seeing the writing on the wall, made her move. She realized that the Sterling ship was taking on water and she had no intention of going down with it. She gave an exclusive tell-all interview to a tabloid magazine, painting herself as a victim, a naive young woman who had been seduced and manipulated by a powerful older man. She portrayed Richard as a Svengali figure, a man who had promised her the world and then left her with nothing. It was a calculated act of self-preservation, a final desperate attempt to salvage her own reputation at his expense. The interview was the final nail in Richard's coffin. He was now not just a villain, but a pathetic one. He was a man who had been outplayed by his wife, abandoned by his children, and now publicly betrayed by his mistress. He was alone, isolated in his glass and steel tower, a king with no subjects, no allies, and no one to blame but himself. In the end, he had no choice but to surrender. He agreed to a settlement that was far more generous to Catherine than anything he had ever imagined. She received a significant portion of his fortune, the Fifth Avenue penthouse, the Hamptons house, and a substantial stake in Sterling Holdings. It was not just a victory. It was a vindication. Catherine, Liam, and Chloe stood together on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the city that was once again theirs. The war was over. They were bruised. They were scarred, but they were whole. They had faced the storm and had emerged not unscathed but stronger, more united, and with a clearer sense of who they were and what they valued. Catherine Sterling, the woman who had been publicly discarded, had not just survived, she had triumphed. She had reclaimed her name, her fortune, and her family. She was no longer just the wife of a billionaire. She was the matriarch of a new Sterling dynasty, one built not on ruthless ambition and public spectacle, but on loyalty, integrity, and the enduring power of family. The battle had been won not with a shout, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. And in the end, that had been the most powerful weapon of all. The aftermath of the Sterling divorce was as closely watched as the initial scandal, but for entirely different reasons. It became a story not of betrayal, but of reinvention. Catherine, now one of the wealthiest women in New York, did not retreat into a life of quiet luxury. Instead, she stepped into a new public role with a grace and purpose that surprised everyone except perhaps her children. She took her seat on the board of Sterling Holdings, not as a silent partner, but as an active and influential voice. Her knowledge of the company's history, her innate understanding of the city's social and political landscape, and her newfound confidence made her a formidable presence. She championed a new direction for the company, one that focused on sustainable development, community engagement, and ethical business practices. It was a vision that resonated with a new generation of investors and clients, and under her guidance the company began to regain its footing, its reputation slowly being rebuilt on a foundation of integrity rather than arrogance. Liam, with his mother's backing and a substantial investment from her settlement, launched his own company, Sterling Green. It was a small boutique firm specializing in environmentally conscious urban design. His first project was a low-income housing development in the Bronx, a building that incorporated green roofs, solar panels, and community gardens. It was a project that would have made his father scoff, but it earned Liam the respect of his peers and a sense of fulfillment that he had never found in the corporate world of Sterling Holdings. He was building something that was not just profitable, but meaningful. Chloe, graduating from Columbia with honors, turned down lucrative job offers from major auction houses and galleries. Instead, she used a portion of her trust fund, now securely under her mother's control, to establish the Davenport Sterling Arts Foundation. Its mission was to provide grants and mentorship to emerging female artists, the very people she had championed in her student exhibition. She became a passionate and articulate advocate for the arts, a patron who was more interested in nurturing talent than in acquiring trophies. The Sterling family, once a symbol of fractured wealth and public scandal, was now being redefined. They were becoming known for their philanthropy, their commitment to social responsibility, their quiet but powerful influence. They were a family that had been forged in the fire of betrayal and had emerged stronger, more united, and with a shared sense of purpose. And what of Richard? He became a cautionary tale, a ghost that haunted the corridors of power he had once dominated. His personal fortune was diminished, his reputation in ruins. The men who had once courted his favor now avoided his calls. The women who had once vied for his attention now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was a man adrift, a king without a kingdom. He traveled, he bought expensive toys, he dated a string of ever younger women, but he could not escape the shadow of his own actions. He had had it all. A beautiful, intelligent wife, loving children, a vast empire. And he had thrown it all away for a fleeting moment of ego-driven passion. He would sometimes see his family in the society pages, their names now associated with worthy causes and successful ventures. He would see Catherine looking more radiant and confident than ever before a woman who had not just survived his betrayal, but had thrived in its wake. He would see Liam, his face filled with a purpose and a passion that he had never seen in him before. He would see Chloe, a fierce and independent woman who was making her own mark on the world. And in those moments, in the lonely silence of his gilded exile, he would be forced to confront the full weight of his loss. He had toasted his mistress and ignored his wife, and in doing so, he had not just lost a marriage, he had lost his family, his legacy, and a part of himself that he would never be able to reclaim. The Sterling name lived on, but it was no longer his. It belonged to them, to the family that had chosen each other, that had chosen to build a new future from the ashes of the past. The real Sterling empire, he was beginning to understand, was not built of glass and steel, but of love, loyalty, and a resilience that he had so foolishly underestimated. He had won the battle for Ella, but he had lost the war for everything that truly mattered. And that was a defeat from which he would never recover. That was the story of the Sterling family, a story of how one man's betrayal became a catalyst for three people's transformation. It's a reminder that true wealth isn't measured in billions, but in loyalty, integrity, and the unbreakable bonds of family. What did you think of Catherine's journey from a scorned wife to a powerful matriarch? Do you believe Richard got what he deserved in the end? We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments below.